Okay, I am standing here at the site of Camp Letterman. And Camp Letterman got its beginnings on July 5th, 1863. So it was just 150 years ago that Camp Letterman got its beginnings. And that is when Assistant Adjutant General Seth Williams issued orders to establish a general hospital or a tent hospital here at Gettysburg. Now, at the Battle of Gettysburg, there was 53,000 casualties. After the Army of Northern Virginia retreated and the Union Army picked up and fled after them, there were approximately 30,000 wounded that were left here on the fields. And of course, in town, local farms, houses, barns, hospitals, different buildings and churches became temporary, immediate field hospitals. And of course, as the days went on, those hospitals became overcrowded and were unable to care for the wounded. Seeing this in advance, Seth Williams issued orders to establish a general hospital, an outdoor hospital here on this site. Now, the site we're standing on was the old George Wolfe Farm, and the George Wolfe Farm sat on this hill here. The farm sat close to the York Road here, and just to the right over here, behind what is McDonald's today, sat a railroad depot, and of course the York Pike, which still runs by here today in front of the McDonald's. That made it easy to move soldiers in or out of this hospital when needed. Now, the camp was named after Jonathan Letterman, and Jonathan Letterman was the developer of what we know as the triage hospital, or he had a system of first aid stations off of the battlefield that would assist in transporting wounded right from the battlefield into these triage hospitals. And it was a lot of his system that was used to establish Camp Letterman, which was named after Jonathan Letterman. Now, as I said earlier, this was the immediate site of the hospital, which we see this empty area in front of us, and then just over here to the right where you see the Hilton Garden Inn and the shopping center, the giant shopping center, the camp filtered into that area as well. Now, in 1863, there was a road just to my immediate left here before that billboard that went all the way back beyond that little tower back there and to the fence and the tree line that you see in the distance. And that was the original 1863 entrance road to the camp. Now, before 1863, before the Battle of Gettysburg, that road went back further 2 farms and connected to the original Bonnytown Carlisle Turnpike. The Bonnytown Carlisle Turnpike I did in my Secrets of the videos on the Daniel Lady Farm. You'll want to go back and watch that video. But that road, which dated back to the 1740s, stretched from what is now Bonneville, which used to be called Bonnytown, back toward the Daniel Lady Farm property, and then shot up this way, came through right here to the York Pike, and then went just behind this C&R Auto Fleet and the McDonald's this way and connected to the Carlisle Turnpike. And remnants of the Carlisle Turnpike today are part of the Hunterstown Road, which goes this way. So this road actually came in and connected, and then originally went out to the old Harrisburg Road, which took them then up to Carlisle. So the 1863 entrance road to Camp Letterman, which sat here, was actually a portion of the old 1740s road, the Bonnytown Carlisle Turnpike. This has been part 1 of Camp Letterman, 2 of Camp Letterman, and we're starting here at the Hilton Garden Inn, and we're actually looking at the east side of the building. And when you turn 180 degrees, you go back into the Camp Letterman site. The area that we're in directly in front of us, right here, from about this view, right on up to here, to where the hill line is here in the distance. At the time in 1863, this was covered by woods. And this area was where the cook tent was. Now, the reason the cook tent was here, and one of the reasons that Camp Letterman was chosen was because of its natural springs. It had several natural springs, and still does to this day, that flow water out of this area here. And they built a permanent cookhouse on the site of Camp Letterman. It was a wood-structured building, and this provided fresh water coming from the springs out of the ground for the soldiers, as well as the cookhouse with many basins where they could cook up different types of stews and soups and coffee, fresh coffee, for these wounded Union and Confederate soldiers. That, along with the site actually being on a hill, provide great drainage of waste products, wastewater, and later on, as we're going to see when we get to the other part of Camp Letterman, foul smells were also, because of the winds, directed away from the camp. But this area of the camp here is the cook tent area of the camp, and once status a structure over here where they would cook all the food and provide the water for these wounded soldiers. This has been part 2 of the George Wolfe Farm, also known as Camp Letterman. I am now standing on the west side of the Hilton Garden Inn, and as I pan around, you're going to see a dumpster here. And ironically enough, the area from this dumpster over toward this area of the giant shopping center fuel station in 1863 here, from July for the next 121 days until November, stood the trash burn pits. Now, of course, with a camp of this size and magnitude, where you have anywhere between 800 and 1,800 soldiers going through at any one time and treating over 3,000 during the few-month period that it existed, you came up with a lot of rubbish. You know, waste products and different types of trash, and those trash and that rubbish was all brought into this area here between that dumpster that's behind that bush and this gas station, and they were brought in here and they were burned in pits that were dug in the ground. Ironically enough, today there's a dumpster near the site of the trash burn pits, and even more ironically, a gas station. So just a little bit of added history to our site here. This area here, where the giant fuel station to the dumpster here, was the site of the trash burn pits of Camp Letterman in 1863. This has been part 3 of Camp Letterman, the George Wolfe Farm, on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Of our series on Camp Letterman, and directly in front of us are a couple benches with wayside markers that we're going to go over and look at in a minute. We're going to see a quote by a local civilian named Sally Myers, and then also an account of a letter that was written here from a man in the 17th Connecticut Volunteers. But there were several panoramic views of Camp Letterman that were taken from about where the 3rd telephone pole is back here, back in 1863, in this direction, and later I'll post them. In this direction, the panoramic views went from left to right, from about where that Hallmark store is over there, straight on out to about right here where these wayside markers are. And the 5 photographs that were taken, if you line them up, show a scene depicting where our camera is now. And also at the time, since there was a lot less trees, you could actually see the town in the distance. And later on, we're going to try to get a panoramic view of the surrounding town from this hill here on the George Wolfe Farm. But let's take a walk over to the wayside markers, and I want to read from them to kind of give you an idea of where we're standing and what was happening here on this ground. Now, on this ground in 1863, from just between this 1st and 2nd telephone pole to about where that silver car is over there in the distance, right here, was the General Hospital wards. There were 6 rows of tents between those, and in a minute I'm going to show you where the 4th row was. But let's take a walk over here to these wayside markers here, and we're going to look at them both and read them both. The first one is entitled "The Sight of Blood Never Affected Me Again," and it says, with the departure of the two armies following the battle, the burden of caring for the wounded fell largely on the shoulders of the local civilians. Although much attention has been paid to the United States Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission, little notice has been given to the area citizens whose houses and barns were used as field hospitals. Sally Myers, a young woman at 21 in 1863, was one of many local residents who nursed the wounded at Camp Letterman, and in later years she recalled, "The sight of blood never again affected me, and I was among the wounded and dying men day and night. While the battle lasted and the town was in possession of the rebels, I went back and forth between my home and the hospitals without fear. The soldiers called me brave, but I am afraid the truth was that if I did not know enough to be afraid, and if I had known enough, I had no time to think of the risk I ran, for my heart and my hands were full. I shall always be thankful that I permitted to minister to the wants and soothe the last hours of some of the brave men who lie suffering and dying for the dear old flag." And in this Wayside Marker is view 4 of the 5-view panorama. And if you look in the marker, you're going to see this tent here that I'm pointing at. This was the last tent in row 4, and that tent, actually, the spot it was located today is just left to this marker. There's a handicapped parking spot right here. And if we look at this handicapped parking spot and we go over here and stand on it, this was where that tent at the end of row 4 sat in 1863. So this was the end of the row. Now these tents were in 6 rows, and between each row of tents, there were 17 tents per row leading in that direction. Okay, so you had row 4, 5, 6, and then you had 3, 2, and 1. 2 and 1 being beyond the trees there. The tents themselves were 15 feet wide and 14 feet deep. Sometimes they would put 2 tents together, making them 15 feet wide and 28 feet deep. There were 10 feet between each row, and the tents were also lined, as you can see in the photograph. They had cedar on them. And the cedar would not only repel bugs, but it would also get rid of some of the bad odor that was in the camp from different wounds and blood. And if you look at the pictures here, you'll see how they lined them outside with cedar, and I would imagine they would put some cedar on the inside as well for the smell. Now let's turn around and look at the other Wayside Marker. This Wayside Marker is entitled "His Recovery is Considered Doubtful." Among the hundreds of soldiers, nurses, and volunteers who worked at Camp Letterman was Private Justice Silman of the 17th Connecticut Volunteers, a resident of New Canaan. Slightly wounded in the fighting on July 1st, he remained behind to care for the more critically wounded comrade of his, Samuel Comstock. Writing to his mother on August the 11th, 1863, Silman noted that Sam is getting on as usual. His recovery, I believe, is considered doubtful. He is very thin, but is quite strong for one who has suffered so much. I think appearances are favorable at present. 6 weeks later, Private Silman wrote another letter on September the 26th, 1863, saying, "I have just returned from visiting Sam. He is failing rapidly and is liable to drop away at any moment. He seemed disinclined to talk and wished to sleep. I have made arrangements so that I can have him embalmed, and the cost of embalming will be $15 and $5 for the box and $24 for postage." Now, Sam died on September the 27th, and Private Silman accompanied the body of his friend back to New Canaan. Ironically, just a few weeks before, Silman observed that Gettysburg had been an extensive coffin mart and bombers' harvest field, in which these guys made an enormous profit. And you also want to go back and watch 2 videos I've done that connects this story. One of them is on the 17th Connecticut at Gettysburg and their monument, and the other one is a series I did on the arrival of the 11th Corps at Gettysburg, which you can actually trace the route that Justice Silman and his friend Sam Comstock took on their way to get to Gettysburg just before he was mortally wounded. So this wayside marker here is a story of one of the soldiers who stayed here in this area with his friend, and was with him for his last days on Earth. And this spot again is at the Waysides. It's between the Hilton Garden Inn Hotel here, and then the left side of the giant shopping center, which you see the Papa John's Pizza and the Holiday Hair. This has been part 4 of Camp Letterman shopping center here, and we're going to do part 5 of Camp Letterman. And just in this little clearing here in a moment, you're going to see the back of the giant shopping center, the Papa John's store. And you're going to see a dumpster, then to its right a car, and then to its right a little grassy area with an electric box. And where that box sits today was actually the site of the operating tents here at Camp Letterman. And the operating tents at Camp Letterman were like today if you were to receive a gunshot wound and you would have to go to the hospital, you would go into the emergency operating rooms. You wouldn't go into the general population or the hospital or be placed in a waiting room. You would actually be in an operating tent. And these were the most severe cases of the soldiers who were wounded in battle and then taken here to the site. They were put into the operating tents. Now, from our first couple videos that we shot, to give you an idea where we're at, the first one we shot was out here on the York Road. The second one was where that large tree is, sits right over here over the corner of the building here in the distance. The third one, which was the trash burn pits, were beyond the building in this direction. And then the fourth side was on the wayside directly in front of the stores over here. But this is the site of the operating tents that sat here at Camp Letterman, where the severe cases, the men were operated on, limbs being amputated and bullets being extracted and so forth. So this has been Camp Letterman, Part 5. Okay, this is Part 6 of Camp Letterman. And we're standing here at the corner of Camp Letterman Road and Natural Springs Road. Now, Natural Springs Road goes down to Route 30. And of course, a road's named Natural Springs because just in the distance on the other side of the shopping center sat several natural springs, which the cookhouse that we looked at in part 2 was located. So this area had springs, and of course today this road is named Natural Springs Road. Camp Letterman Road goes into this private development here. And basically Camp Letterman Road connects this way behind the shopping center, and it was the rear fence line of the George Wolfe Farm, also known as Camp Letterman. And one of the more interesting things about this area is the view. Of course, soldiers that were here at the hospital were obviously wounded in the Battle of Gettysburg on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. And if you could place yourself as one of those soldiers, whether it be Union or Confederate, let's try to do that for a moment. Think for a moment yourself, I am a Union soldier or I am a Confederate soldier. Okay, now once you have that down, think that you were taken to a hospital in a home nearby. And then after a period of time, as Camp Letterman developed, you were brought here. Now you're looking at sometime in mid-July through November, you're brought here to the George Wolfe Farm, and you're placed in an outdoor tent hospital here, just a distance away from where you were fought and wounded. And if you fought and wounded on the first day's battlefield, such as the Lutheran Theological Seminary, or let's say Oak Hill where the Eternal Light Peace Memorial was, you can see those in the distance. If you look just beyond that large antenna there in the field, just to the right is the tree line where today the Eternal Light Peace Memorial sits. That's the first day's battlefield on the northern end, where Rhodes' Confederate division passed through, Iverson's Pits, you know, all the actions of the first day. And you can see the Eternal Light Peace Memorial from this site. If you move over here just a little ways toward Camp Letterman Road here, in the distance you can also see the cupola of the Lutheran Theological Seminary, though it's a little difficult right now. It sits just in the distance beyond that sign that says no outlet. So if you were wounded on the first day's battlefield, McPherson's Woods, a Union soldier down at McPherson's Woods, a Confederate soldier down at McPherson's Woods, you would again be at this hospital, and if you were recuperating nicely, you could walk out here to this hospital hill and see the actual battlefield that you were wounded on. And then if you stand here right where the crossroads of the sign was, in the distance directly down this Camp Letterman Road, there's a little tiny clearing right here, and I can see the gatehouse of the Evergreen Cemetery. So if you were wounded here on July 1st or 2nd or 3rd, 1863, in areas like East Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Ridge of some sort, or even in the battle through the town that erupted, the skirmishes through the town, you can see the Evergreen Cemetery gatehouse right from the site. So this site is kind of interesting because it gives you a panoramic view of the Gettysburg battlefield. And it sits here next to this large blue water tower. And as we walk past this tower, up even further on the hill, you'll be able to see the southern end of the battlefield. Now, of course, directly behind the tower, a few farms back in the distance, is the Daniel Lady Farm, and we've done 2 videos at the Daniel Lady Farm. So you want to go back and review those photos. Now, there was a group of photos taken from the Lutheran Theological Seminary area that show the town of Gettysburg, and in the distance you can see the tents of Camp Letterman. And today you can use this blue water tower here as a marker, just as you can the blue water tower on East Cemetery Hill as a marker. But here in the distance, just beyond these trees over here, is Big and Little Round Top. So again, from Hospital Hill here on part 6, you can get a panoramic view of the entire battlefield, the southern end, the western end, and the northern end of the battlefield. This has been part 6 of Camp Letterman site, and directly we're up on the hill, and the site that we're looking at now is not too far from where we took our first video at. In the distance here in front of us, where you can see the American flag, is the McDonald's, and then over there to the left is the Hilton Garden Inn. Over here is the Hossa Steakhouse on the York Pike, and then the large building is the Walmart. And the site that we're looking at now, where all this high grass is directly in front of us, from about the York Pike all the way back here into the distance as we go up the hill, was the original site of the support tents, the support staff tents of Camp Letterman. Sat here, not too far from the original 1863 road, which ran right to the back over here. The support staff was just basically any support of the surgeons at Camp Letterman. Also civilians, and some, like as we read in the account of the soldier that was mortally wounded in the 17th Connecticut, his friend. Anybody that was permitted to support any of the staff at Camp Letterman was tented right in this area here. Then in the distance, where you see that large tree in the background, and then this fence line back in that corner over there, and we'll go into depth later on that. That was the U.S. Sanitary Commission and the U.S. Christian Commission, just behind this large pile of debris that you see here. Now, where we are standing now is between the U.S. Sanitary and Christian Commissions, which were located just behind this pile of debris, and then in this grassy field here in front of where you see the Hilton Garden, in this distance was the General Hospital tents. And of course, the shopping center is directly in front of us. Now, in the distance, you can see the cupola of the Lutheran Theological Seminary behind the shopping center, and then the college complex just to its right, in between both the Hilton Garden and the shopping center. You can see the college complex here. And just about 15 years ago sat a mobile home park, which is the road that I'm walking on here. There was a mobile home park that sat here for some years. Now, amazingly enough, about 65% of Camp Letterman is still undeveloped. The only developed part was the giant shopping center, the parking lot, and the Hilton Garden. But most of the General Hospital ward tents, the support staff, which sat over here, the U.S. Christian Commission and the U.S. Sanitary Commission, which sat back in this corner over here, the cook tent, which is just where the high trees are there to the right of the Hilton Garden, that's all undeveloped. So 65% of the original site of Camp Letterman is still undeveloped and could be preserved if a developer doesn't buy the area and develop it. So amazingly enough, most of the site is still undeveloped and could be saved. This has been part 7 of Camp Letterman part 8. And what I want to do in this video is I am actually standing here on Oak Hill with the Eternal Light Peace Memorial behind me in the distance. And earlier in a video I had mentioned being able to see the Eternal Light Peace Memorial from Hospital Hill, and I aimed the camera in this direction. Now I'm here on Oak Hill, and directly in front of us you have this cannon here. And then in the distance you have a antenna, and then behind it in the distance you can see the light blue water tower which sits on Hospital Hill. And then just to the left of the tower over here you can see the Hilton Garden Inn and the giant shopping center. That is the area of Camp Letterman, and there were actually photographs taken from around this area in 1863, a little bit further to our south, that showed the town of Gettysburg, which is in the distance, and then behind it, instead of the Hilton Garden Inn and the giant shopping center, you could see rows of white tents, which was Camp Letterman. So I'm just trying to give you a perspective view from what Camp Letterman looked like in the distance from Oak Hill, and about how far in distance it was here from the first day's battlefield. This has been part 8 of Camp Letterman. Okay, I am here at the Camp Letterman site, also known as the George Wolfe Farm, and this is going to be part 9 in our video series. And we are in the southeastern corner of what was Camp Letterman. And we're going to talk about a couple areas here today. The first one would be right where my camera is facing, and that is where the U.S. Christian Commission was encamped. Now, the U.S. Christian Commission was there for the spiritual welfare of the soldiers. And they were camped right here in this area, and their job basically was to overlook the spiritual welfare of the soldiers, meet the needs of their particular faith, whether that be Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, or so on. They would hand out tracts, they would have mass, they would have Bible study, they would have different spiritual activities to aid the soldier along in his physical rehabilitation as well. So they were placed here in the camp. Looking over into this area, first I want to point out that that tree is a witness tree. That's a Camp Letterman witness tree. It's about 170 years old. It's one of only a few left here at the old Camp Letterman site. And right there in front of that tree, in this area, which was wooded at the time, was where the U.S. Sanitary Commission was camped. And you can see both U.S. Sanitary Commission and U.S. Christian Commission tents in the photos of Camp Letterman if you look them up online. Now, the U.S. Sanitary Commission was a modern-day Red Cross. They overlooked the sanitary conditions of the camp and seen that everything that was being done by the medical personnel, the surgeons and their assistants, was being done in a sanitary manner. Now, they were encamped in this area. Just in front of us, in the distance, you can see the Hals's Steakhouse, and then just beyond the row of trees here would be today's Gettysburg Walmart area. That was where the camp support staff was housed. Now, all this area here was under the shade of trees back in 1863 here on the George Wolfe farm. And in recent years, just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a tree clearing here just after they got rid of the mobile home park. There used to be a mobile home park here on this field, which is Camp Letterman. As I stated in a few other videos, this in 1863 was the George Wolfe farm, and I'm sure you can hear the wind blowing here today. This was one of the reasons that this site was chosen, because it sat up high on a hill. It had excellent airflow. It had excellent drainage for the water. It sat very high, as it's hard to see on a sunny day like this, but in the distance here, just beyond this water tower, you can actually see the water tower on East Cemetery Hill here in the distance, and the cemetery gatehouse. Over here to the right of this little structure here, just in the distance over here, you can actually see Oak Ridge, where the Eternal Light Peace Memorial. And then just in the distance over here in this ridge line, you can actually see the Lutheran Seminary. And the photograph that I had posted yesterday on the Gettysburg Facebook was a photograph taken from Seminary Ridge looking in this direction. If you look up on the top left-hand corner, you can actually see the tents of Camp Letterman, which would have been just in front of us about 200 yards. So to recap, the section over here by the Halses was this camp support. Back here in the southeastern corner was the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and then over here was the U.S. Christian Commission. These were all their campsites here at Camp Letterman. In our next video series, we're gonna take a look at the embalming tent, the dead house, and the cemetery, which were just on the other side of this fence in the grove of trees that's out there today, as well as an archaeological dig that was done about 15 years ago where they were looking for different artifacts. I'm just waiting to receive permission from the property owner to go over there, but that'll be on our next series of videos here on Camp Letterman. This has been Camp Letterman, Part 9. Standing here, we're going to continue our series on Camp Letterman here. On our last part, we left you with the U.S. Sanitary Commission and the U.S. Christian Commission, which were just in this direction today. Today's video is going to be on the embalming tent and the graveyard at Camp Letterman. I am standing in now this little cleared out area where the graveyard once stood. To my right would be the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and going out toward Route 30 where the camp was. To my left in this direction would be Route 116 and the Daniel Lady Farm here in the distance. The embalming tent where the bodies were brought after they died sat right over here where this little tree is at. And in this area right here where I'm standing, where it's cleared out, this would have been the cemetery. Now here at Camp Letterman, there were 301 men who were buried in the cemetery, both Union and Confederate, both enlisted men and officers, and one black Confederate teamster that was buried in the cemetery here where I'm standing. Now, the reason that this is clear here, and it seems like everything else is overgrown, about 20 years ago, they did an archaeological study of the ground here to see if they could find anything, and they dug down about 1.5 feet. And if you look over here, you can see the rise in the ground where they had actually dug down. And they dug down in two spots. They dug down here, and then just about 15 yards toward the actual campsite itself, just before the fence. Now, of course, all the bodies that were buried here in the Camp Letterman Cemetery were disinterred. Northern troops being buried in the National Cemetery or in their hometowns. Confederate troops as well taken to their hometown. So there were no bodies left here on the field, though there may have been a bone chip or some type of remains of a grave that wasn't completely cleaned out. The site of Camp Letterman, where we stand, if you to both our left and our right, it goes downhill. We're actually on the highest ground in the area here, and that was specifically done because both bad water drainage from the cemetery, with all the bad water from the bodies that were rotting into the ground, would have drained toward the Daniel Lady Farm property downhill into a ditch. Also, the wind. This is a very windy farm, as you can imagine, in 1863, and you can even hear the wind in some of our older videos. Most of the wind goes toward the south, toward 116 in the Daniel Lady Farm. So any foul odors associated with corpses in the ground would have. Letterman, Part 11, the site of the former George Wolfe farmhouse and barn. And we're standing here in a woods today. I'm going to turn around, and directly in front of us is Route 30. This is the old Ren Kirby building over here, and to our right there are a couple hotels and a Dairy Queen. And this little rise in the ground that sits over here in the woods is the old foundation for the old George Wolfe house, and then over in the distance over there is the old barn foundation. There once was, right about where Ren Kirby building is, there was a road, a driveway that came out here and then curved around toward the camera. That was the farm, the location that marked the spots of the house, the outbuildings, and the barn. Now, as I walk out to the road here from the woods, over the last 10 videos that we shot on Camp Letterman, we focused mainly in the area of where Camp Letterman's hospital was. Camp Letterman's hospital was, of course, on the George Wolfe farm, and George Wolfe owned well over 275 acres here in Gettysburg. Now, the farm that the hospital was located was on the eastern part of George Wolfe farm, which is in the distance that way. Today, because of development and progress, most of the George Wolfe farm is gone. There are several hotels. There's a U-Haul. There's a Dairy Queen ice cream, a Perkins, different restaurants, shops, a healthcare center, I believe called Transitions Healthcare, a Econo Lodge. And as we walk out here, and there used to be a miniature golf place that sits right here that's now been abandoned. It's up for sale. Days Inn, Super 8. Everything from where the house used to sit eastward, going in that direction, was all part of the George Wolfe farm, and extended beyond this hotel over to where the Giant Shopping Center sits today. And that's where we shot the first 10 videos, over at the at the Giant Shopping Center. So you'll want to go back and watch those 10 parts on Camp Letterman. The location that we're filming in today marks the spot again where the house, the outbuildings, and the barn once stood, and that is right here on Route 30, just next to what used to be the old Ren Kirby building. At one time, a driveway came in this direction right here, back into where the wooded area now, and the house sat over here, and the barn and different outbuildings sat just to its right, and the driveway curved to the left over to the house. Of course, the house and barn are no longer there. And to get a reference point, this water tower is the water tower we've seen on some of our earlier parts of Camp Letterman. Sits over at the giant shopping center. So you can see that the farmhouse and buildings sat here, and the property extended all the way here and beyond this tower into the giant shopping center. So it was a huge farm that George Wolfe owned, where the largest field hospital here at Gettysburg once sat on his property. This has been Camp Letterman, Part 11, and Secrets of the Battlefield, the location of the old George Wolfe farm and what's left today, the remnants of the foundation. In Part 12, and we're standing here at the Hilton Garden Inn, here along the York Pike, which is over here in the distance. And today we're going to look at the monument that's been placed out just to the right side of the entrance of the Hilton under the flagpole. And as we've toured all through the Camp Letterman site in the past 11 videos, we have taken you over to the site where the spring house, the cookhouse was over here in the distance, where the United States Christian Commission and the Sanitary Commission. Behind the Hilton has been where the field tents were set up. Of course, over here was the trash pits that we looked at, and back behind the giant shopping center over here where the water tower is that you can see in the distance, of course, was Hospital Hill. And then beyond, along the giant shopping center, behind the Papa John's operating tent, and in the distance, far in the distance, was the cemetery. And then, of course, the George Wolfe farm, which we shot on our last video, was back beyond over here, the actual farm buildings and house. This was all farmland, and this was the hospital site. And on July 5th, 2013, this monument that sits here under the flagpole was dedicated. And we're going to read it in a minute, but it basically says that the field hospital that was here was the largest on the western hemisphere of the earth. It was named after medical doctor and Major Jonathan Letterman. And that the hospital sat here from July 22nd, 1863 till November the 20th, 1863. And as we went through a lot of our videos on farms and field hospitals and different barns, you have to remember that all the patients from those barns that we've looked at ended up coming here, or most of them ended up coming here a few weeks after the battle, and this is where they were cared for until either their death or their transfer to a military prison or their transfer home. And again, on July 5th, this monument was dedicated of 2014 for the 150th anniversary. And it reads, Camp Letterman on the site from July 22nd to November 20th, 1863, was constructed the largest field hospital in the Western Hemisphere. Named after Major Jonathan Letterman, MD, USMS, of the Army of the Potomac, caring for 21,000 Union and Confederate casualties. Erected to mark the 150th anniversary, July 5th, 2013, by the Confederation of Union Generals, Patrick Fairburn, President, Dr. Randall Craker, Monument Chair, Lee Hartford, Preservation Chair, John M. Hart, Jr., Vice President, Chair. And again, not only is this a very important site that's been partially developed by a shopping center here, but it is the site of the largest hospital ever erected on the Western Hemisphere of the earth. And in our last 11 videos, we've taken you around the site of the old George Wolfe farm. And again, today we're here at the Hilton Garden Inn, right under the flagpoles of the front entrance to the monument that was dedicated July 5th, 2013, on the 150th anniversary of the Camp Letterman site. This has been Camp Letterman, Part 12 here